Okay, in this lecture, I'm going to talk about chapter 3 of Future of an Illusion by Freud. In chapter 3, basically, it introduces Freud's concept of religion, which is, if you remember from the last lecture and from chapter 2, is the fourth of the mental assets. So let me go over briefly the big picture again of the Future of an Illusion, and then I'll focus on chapter 3. To understand the future of an illusion, basically you have to understand that it presents two problem solution sets: problem one, solution one; problem two, solution two, and they all have to do with the problem of civilization. Civilization. The first problem is this: civilization is surrounded by enemies. On the one hand, nature, by which he means untamed nature, that's an enemy. That would include hurricanes and tsunamis and the coronavirus. All this comes from nature. So civilization has to mobilize itself against nature to defend itself. We create medicine and we build dams and so on, and we spend billions of dollars to defend ourselves against nature. On the other hand, civilization has to defend itself against the individual or individuals who compose civilization. Freud says we love civilization because it defends us, helps protect us from nature, but we also hate it. It's a love-hate relationship. It's ambivalent. And why do we hate it? Freud says we hate it because we have all these instincts. And the taboos forbid the satisfaction of these instincts. And the taboos are the law, prohibition or the taboo against incest, cannibalism, and killing. Now, I'm not offering a criticism of Freud. I'm just presenting Freud's ideas. When I'm all finished with the Future of an Illusion, I will voice some of my criticisms of myself and other people against psychoanalysis or against Freud's ideas. But anyway, right now, I'm not trying to critique anything what Freud said. I'm just explaining what he believes. Freud believes that everyone has these instinctual desires to commit incest, cannibalism, and killing. We all have these desires, he said, and civilization forbids us to carry out those desires because it would bring the end of civilization. It would bring civilization to an end. It would be absolute chaos would be reigning if everybody could, for example, kill anybody they wanted to kill just because they're angry at them. You can't. A civilization can't survive that way. So there has to be laws to prohibit this stuff. And since we have these desires, and Freud says he believes that we have these desires because he's from analyzing his patients, psychoanalysis, he believes that his analysis show that these desires are in human beings, if not conscious, at least unconsciously. So when people say they don't have those desires, Freud say, well, consciously you don't, but they're unconscious. If I could analyze your dreams, I could show you that you do. So anyway, the individual hates civilization because of all these taboos. So what civilization has to do is to find civilization cannot survive if nature wants to destroy it and individuals want to destroy it. Civilization is going to be quickly destroyed. Civilization needs to turn people who hate it into friends who want to build it up. And so that's what Freud talks about in chapter 2, and it does that through the four mental assets, which I refer to as bribes or gifts. And the four mental assets are the four of them. The mental assets, which I talked about last time, are the first one is morality, and that means Freud civilization gives us a conscience, and that usually happens primarily through the education, mainly through the parents and then the immediate adults around them. They instill within the children a sense of the morality of a society. So civilization gives people a morality. It gives them ideals, meaning gives them things to strive for so they can feel good about themselves, builds up their self-esteem, their narcissism. It gives them art, which offers substitute gratifications for these things that they cannot do they cannot act out, but they can enjoy them vicariously through art. Most importantly, it offers them religion, which offers them immortality, victory over death. Because if you agree, believe in the dominant religion of your civilization, you can feel that you can have a confidence that when you die, you will go to heaven or you will have immortality. Morality, ideals, art, religion. These are the four mental assets. And basically, Freud says we shake hands with civilization, we accept the gifts on condition of obedience to the laws of society. Okay, now that's the deal. So in chapter 3, Freud is going to get into religion and explain how religion, the origin of religion. Basically, it's a genetic argument. He's going to the genesis of religion. And then in the next chapter, Freud will get into the difference between religion and science. Basically, what's going to happen is kind of getting ahead right now, but just so that you know where we're going. Freud basically, he's going to look at religion. He's going to kind of open up the present of religion. He's going to look inside, and he's going to see it's empty. There is no. Freud's an atheist. He doesn't believe there's anything in the present. And so he's going to say, wow, I've been cheated. Civilization offered me religion, and I opened the present up, and I see it's empty. So now Freud believes that millions of people are going to have that experience with the development of modern science, and therefore they're going to become very disenchanted with religion, and they're going to become very angry at civilization for deceiving them. And that's going to be a danger because it's going to lead to a lot of resentment against civilization. That's not good for civilization. Civilization wants to have friends, not enemies. Okay, but that's in the future. So in chapter 3, basically Freud is talking about why religion is important. Religion offers us victory over death. It also offers us the hope that injustice will be remedied after death, because in this life that we live in, the good people often suffer and bad people often prosper. So it doesn't seem like life is very fair. But if God exists, then you have a hope that things ultimately will be taken care of. Justice will be done. Freud says religion starts out. Freud in chapter 3 is going to kind of offer a kind of a history, a story of how religion begins. Freud begins that religion, the earliest forms of religion, begin with the humanizing the forces of nature. So you take the forces of the sea and the storm and so on, you turn them into gods. And that's so. If you think of the pagan Greek gods often represented forces of nature. So, for example, you start with you humanize nature. Now, why would that be important? Well, think of humanize nature. And then you turn nature into a god. So think of like Poseidon, the god of the sea. If you're at sea and there's a storm, and you're totally helpless, and you fear imminent death, you feel totally helpless. So you can't do anything. This anxiety just overwhelms you. But Freud says if you turn the sea if you think of the sea as being ruled by Neptune, so Neptune is the god of the sea. So you're humanizing the forces of nature. In this case, the sea. You're seeing the sea as manifesting the god Neptune, right? And so you can pray to Neptune and offer prayers to Neptune. So to get Neptune on your side to intervene and stop the storm from killing you. So the humanizing nature for Freud is a way we have of psychologically dealing with nature and controlling nature. At least we feel safer that way. Now, Freud says that's exactly what children do. I think of a child, the child's father. The child is totally helpless. But the father represents to the child God. If you're 3-4 years old, your father is omnipotent. He's a God. He can do anything. And so children learn that they can, when they're confronted with problems that seem insurmountable, that they can find refuge in their father. And so Freud says when the child grows up and becomes an adult, their helplessness still remains. The adult compared to nature is in confronted with nature, the forces of nature, the adult is totally helpless, just like the child is when he was a child or she was a child. But when you're an adult, you can't turn your father into God anymore because you don't have any father. Now you're the father of your own children. So what you can do though is to turn the forces of nature into God. So Freud says actually we create God. We create our own gods after the image of the father that we had when we were a child. So Freud believes that religion basically is a repetition. It follows an infantile model. It's a repetition of an infantile model. As infants, we were helpless. We had a father who could solve all our problems, make everything turn out for good. And when we become adult, we have no father, so we create our own. We create our father, which is God. So that's what Freud says. That's how initially religion, the gods are born through the humanizing nature. Eventually, Freud says, people start thinking rationally, and eventually they start thinking scientifically, and they realize that actually Neptune and all these Greek gods, they really don't have any power to change nature because nature is controlled by laws, the laws of science, the laws of physics, and so on. So the gods now lose a lot of their power because they really don't have any power. I mean, basically, the law of gravity is stronger than all the gods, right? So what happens when science is born? The gods lose one of their purposes for being. I mean, the whole point of humanizing nature was that the gods could control nature. But when science develops, we realize they can't do that. So Freud says at that point, when science gets developed, the role of the gods gets moved over to more of a moral dimension. So now the gods are really we're not looking to gods anymore for miracles. We're looking for God ultimately, to take care of everything at the end, after this life is over, after, when we die. So now the gods, their role now is basically one of making sure that justice is ultimately done. So after we die, there will be a heaven and a hell, and justice will be done. I mean, nobody's going to get away with anything down here. So Adolf Hitler, he may have gotten away with it down here, but he's not going to get away with it forever. And the people who suffer unjustly down here are going to things will be remedied after they die. So Freud says the role of the gods has been moved from, create miracle workers to basically to the moral dimension where they ensure that justice will be done after death. Now, the only way justice is going to be done after death is if God is capable of doing it. So God's got to be very powerful. He's got to know a lot of stuff. He's basically got to be omniscient and omnipotent. Ultimately, Freud says this religious view of the world where God is at the top and he's the creator of everything was actually the Jews were the ones who did that, who created God, Freud says. Freud himself was a Jew. He was an atheist Jew. But Freud says it was the Jews who basically took all the multiplicity of gods, in the Greek pantheon, and they took the gods and Zeus and Poseidon and Neptune and so on. They took all these gods and turned them into one God, the God of Yahweh of the Old Testament. And so I'll talk about that a little in the next lecture, but that's basically what Freud does in chapter 3. Basically, he's going to give a history of how religion begins with humanizing nature. Eventually, science becomes dominant. The role of the gods now is moved over to more of a moral dimension. And ultimately, in Jewish monotheism, the religious system that we are used to today actually was created. I'll talk a little more about that in the next lecture. But anyway, right now I'm still in chapter 3, talking about Freud's view of religion.